I
All
always
right.
like that.
Right, because then we can, for anybody who can't make it, we can send it off. Well, I would like to welcome Mike Ryan, who's kind enough to come and speak to us today. Mike has 25 years of industry experience, mostly in the air freight and logistics industries, which I think makes him very interesting to our industrial engineers here. So I think we might have to talk with him again at some point. He's founded his own company in the past and was successful enough that he could sell it. He's worked as a consultant for many of the big industry companies that you know, like AT&T, Lucent Technologies, and IBM. And I think he's a great resource for us. So thank you very much for coming by.
Okay. Not a problem at all. And I appreciate the opportunity to do this. The one thing I would like to mention is I prefer Mike. I'm very comfortable with that. I'm not anal about the titles or anything like that. And I encourage people to interrupt me. If there's a question or anything, don't let me just keep going because like many in academia, sometimes you can get carried away.
Yes, like I like to say, like, you know, if you don't stop, I'll keep on talking forever. So
yeah. One of the things I definitely found out about academics is,
yes.
Coming out of business, I tease some of my colleagues because I tell them I used to work for a living before I became an academic. But more to the point is, in academia, we can talk things to the death. We can go round and round and round and round and never make a decision. It doesn't work for entrepreneurs. So the most important thing I can tell you today is entrepreneurs know how to make a decision. So what I'm going to talk about today, can I share my screen, Carl?
Yes, go ahead. You should be able to.
Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
Okay, so we use a business model canvas that was developed in Stanford. It's been adopted by the NSF, National Science Foundation, here in the States. And the reason we use that is it's a practical approach. And I can't stress that enough. It's nice to know the academic theories and the formulas and all that other stuff, but you also want to know how it really applies. And the business model canvas looks at things from a practical standpoint. How are we going to make our business sustainable? Right? So we're going to go through this, and this is a pretty large deck. So whether we get through the whole thing or not, I'm not worried about because the richness is in the beginning. But I want to give you a sense of what you should be doing, particularly as a project is a couple-week project. That fits right into the our approach with the regional I-Corps systems. Regional I-Corps generally run 2 to 3 weeks and just deal with part of the business model canvas. When you go into national I-Corps, it's a 7-week, very intense process that covers the other areas. And so this is just an introduction at this point. So let's see if I can get this working. So what we want to look at is the business model as it relates to customer development, right? Because without customers, you don't have a business. So the first question that we have to address is, what's a company, right? And why this might seem to be obvious, a lot of times we don't take the time to define what we're trying to accomplish. And it helps if we can agree on certain terms. So a company is a business organization that sells product or services in exchange for revenue and profit. Now, even if it's a not-for-profit organization, they want to make money so that they can be sustainable. So the profit might be just reinvested in the company, but it's still a company. The idea is to be sustainable. Now, what's a startup on the other hand? Anybody want to guess at this one?
A company that's just starting?
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's an organization that's just starting. I'm not going to say company because a startup is a temporary organization. Okay, it's an initial thing designed to search for repeatable and scalable business model, and one that wants to become a company. So it's the antecedent to companies. It's what's going to give us the foundation. So if we look at how companies are organized, they're organized around business models, right? There's a plan. And that's part of what we want to talk about today is what do we want to encompass in this business model that's going to make us sustainable and profitable so that we can move from being a startup to a company. So the business model defines how we create, deliver, and capture value. Right? There's no shortcut with this. Companies and startups are designed to be economic engines. So we want to create value. We want to figure out how to get it into the hands of somebody who's going to compensate us for that so that we can capture value, right? The capture is in the dollars. So in essence, how do we make money, right? So this is the business model canvas. If you notice, there's 9 portions to this. And we actually read this from right to left instead of left to right. So we start off on the far right-hand side and we look at those customer segments. So when we go through a regional ICOR, and this is just to give you an idea, we expect the startups to complete an initial business model canvas, and I'll explain that in a moment. We want them to figure out how to construct experiments that will eliminate bias and be able to conduct interviews. They should capture them and present those findings ultimately in a closing workshop. Now, are most of you engineering students, or what's the background?
Engineer.
It's a
Engineer?
It's a mix of engineering and then retail and restaurant, hotel, and institution management and business. So we have a mix of those.
Okay, good. So one of the things we have to be careful of is that second line, the question of bias. And I usually use engineers as a I'm going to say a metaphor, because engineers are really good at this. What they'll do is they'll hold up this element and they'll say, this widget is the best thing since sliced bread, and this is what it's good for. And what that implies is that they already know the answer. Right? And this would apply to any business. In the restaurant hospitality, we know we're going to pack the restaurant every night, or we're going to pack the hotel or the event because we know the answers. Well, sad to say, most of the time, the inventor doesn't know the answers. They have an idea. And what we have to do is we have to test that idea before we go out and throw a lot of money at it and find out that it's not sustainable. Does anybody know the definition of a boat? Okay. A boat is a hole in the water that sucks up your money. When we start up a business or start up an organization where we know all the answers ahead of time, a lot of times we're in the same position as a boat because we haven't done our homework. So these are our expectations going forward. And what we do is we look at these two and our regional I-Corps. These are the two areas that we look at. We don't even get into the other ones yet because that takes a lot more time. But we want to identify potential customers, customer segments, and we need to identify what their values are. Not what our technology is, but rather what would they be interested in? And why would they be interested in a particular thing? So,
Sorry, but do you also mean by that, like, how much would they actually pay for that? How they feel, how much they would pay for that?
oh, we don't even get into money yet, Carl.
Okay.
Right now, what we're simply trying to do is find out what's important to them. Right? Think about it. A lot of times when you're looking for something, you're not looking at the price first. You're looking for something that will fulfill your need. Then you start worrying about the price. Right? And if something fulfills your need, a lot of times the price becomes irrelevant.
Okay.
So we want to understand the benefits that they can derive, and keep in mind, benefits are from the perspective of the customer, not what we're projecting. So what are the benefits they can derive from our product or services? So when we look at the technology of the product, right? That's our natural reaction. Hey, we invented this. We came up with this idea. This has got to be great. It's a critical piece of the value, but it is not the value in of itself. And this is that bias that we have to get rid of, right? So what we do is we have to recognize the customer doesn't really care about our technology. What they care about is, does it satisfy or solve a problem that they have, satisfy a need, or help them do their job? That's what they're concerned about. And what we have to do is we have to understand that the product features are not the same as the value propositions. But they deliver it, they inform it. Okay. And what we want to do is try to find out from the customer these elements. The what is the product, the how is the features, but the why, this is what puts us forward, is the value from the customer's perspective. So the first thing that a lot of times we address is the painkillers. What is happening that's preventing them from doing what they want, right? Something doesn't work well. They feel bad, right? There's obstacles to it. It's too intricate or too involved or whatever. And we have to figure out how we can help them relieve those pains. We can also look at possible gains. It would be nice if it also did this, right? That's how we went from cell phones that simply carried a voice to now we can do FaceTime and all the other things on it, right? It was nice to have. It's a gain. So we look for value propositions. And again, this is from the perception of the customer. So we're not talking about how many megapixels it has or anything like that. They want to know it gives you clear pictures, right? They don't care if it's 10 gigabytes or 100 gigabytes. They want to know that they can get to the internet and download and upload, right? This is what we have to do. And so we start to understand what is important to them. So we do this by creating hypotheses, okay? And we use the QRST model to develop value propositions. And these are hypotheses. So when we create a hypothesis, it's based on what we think the customer might want, right? So we do have some input here, but what's important is that we have to phrase it such that we can test it. So we want it quantifiable. Can we measure it? Can we identify the pains and gains or the jobs that they need to do? Is it relevant? Will our product do these things? Try to get some specifics. And ideally, we want to test it. Can it be falsified? And what we want to do is be able to repeat this. So we want to do this through the scientific method. If you're an engineer or you're a scientist, you would understand that sample size is critical, right? I can't make a decision based on one interview, okay? One set of values. What I want to do is I want to identify something that's consistent or that multiple parties identify. So we test it. And the QRST model, the hypothesis, is changed over time as we get more input from our potential customer segments. And by the way, customer segments, when we do customer interviews, we interview one person at a time. We don't do a focus group. We don't do a survey. We interview one person at a time. Because if you do a focus group, the first person that speaks up tilts the response of all the others. In a survey, most of the time, a lot of times you'll get the socially desirable answer. If we're talking one-on-one with somebody, if we're interviewing a particular person, we can get some information, especially if we frame our questions as open-ended. You don't want to ask yes or no questions. It gives you no depth. You want to ask questions about the domain. So if I'm selling or want to sell, let's say, a cell phone, right? I created this cell phone. I'm not going to say, okay, look at this cell phone. Here's what it'll do and all this other stuff. What I want to do is I want to ask the customer, what do you look for in a communication device? What's most important to you when you're trying to communicate? What other aspects would you like to have? Right? And with questions like that, we get to situations where I think now the Samsung model opens up. It's a clamshell type of device, but a big clamshell. So you now have this huge screen for a cell phone, right? Because they listened to what the customer said. The customer said, hey, we're not using it just for phone calls anymore. For a lot of people, this is a computer. Certainly, if they talk to my wife, they know the importance of having a large screen because she does everything on the cell phone, right? I have to have big monitors because I'm still old-fashioned. But we want to develop these value propositions and use our hypotheses to find out. So we go
I just
into, yes,
I just have one more question. And
you
it's
can have
okay.
more than one.
I mean, in this case, it makes like sense to do that, but what happens if you have to do too many interviews and you cannot actually like look at those results independently? It will take forever.
Well, Carl, I'm going to tell you that you can't have too many interviews. If you're doing a regional ICOR with me, you're going to do 25. If you're doing our national ICOR has a minimum of 100. I know teams that have done, a couple hundred during national ICOR and then continue to do customer interviews long after they go through ICOR. And that's because, and quite honestly, if you were in a company that had 15 years of experience and you're not doing customer discovery, what you're doing is you're stagnating. You always want to do customer discovery. You always want to find out what they're looking for and see where you can move possibly to another thing, another area. And actually, when I speak about customer segments here, I might be able to make that a little clearer in a moment. Okay?
Thank you.
No problem. So customer segments, again, we're on the far right here. And what we want to do is we want to identify customer segments and their related value propositions. So when we talk about customer segments, we try to identify who are our most important customers. And again, right now it's hypotheses, right? We're guessing, or we're going to use intelligent guesses maybe. We want to know what they look like. And I'm not talking about physically, I'm talking about what's their attributes, what are they looking for? And what job do they want to get done? Right? So if we start to do that, we start to get a picture. And then we want to group customers into customer segments because there can be many customer segments that might be interested in what we're trying to do. And each one of those customer segments may have different business models or different values, right? So I might identify an engineering group that has the values in blue. The sales group for that company might in fact have different values, right? So I want to start to narrow the customer segments in terms of who am I trying to reach? Now, a lot of times, especially when we go into the longer programs, I teach the teams to initially expand their customer segments for the first half of the program, and then narrow them down for the second half. And when I say narrow them down, I'm not saying necessarily to eliminate, but identify the low-hanging fruit. What's going to be able to return a sustainable operation first, and then bring in other customer segments in the future. And Carl, this is why I'm saying you can't have too many, because what happens is you might go after a particular audience initially. Once you're sustainable, you might have enough monies to start going after secondary markets. Speaking from my own experience, one of the worst things in the world for a startup to do is to shotgun, try to be everything to everybody. It's a sure way of not succeeding.
Okay, so it's better if I start with a niche and then expand to a big group.
Yeah, but you have to wait, you have to do your interviews to find out what niche you're going to address.
Okay.
Don't decide that you already know. So when you do the customer segments, we can do it this way, right? We can build business model canvases for each type of customer service. Or we can build an aggregate one and use color coding. And it helps to be able to identify, because as an example, I may have some value propositions that are both blue and red, right? The second one here, that's a shared value proposition between two different customer segments, or red and green in this case, right? So we want to try to make sure that we identify what values are most important to particular customer segments. And I'm sure during the course of your progression here, at some point in time, you're going to want to market your product. Well, this helps you inform your marketing plan. Think about it. Most of the time when you hear a marketing pitch or an advertisement, they're not talking about all the features and everything. They try to address what's of value to the customers that they're talking to, right? You're going to have clearer reception. You're going to be able to get anywhere. You're going to be able to go out to the internet and all the other, right? They try to stress what's important to the customers. So we look at customer segments and the customer types within those segments. So there's a number of different customer types. We have the end user, right? We have the influencer, the recommender, the decision maker, the payer, and we don't want to forget the saboteur. Now, in some cases, these roles are shared by a number of people, right? So your influencer might be the recommender. Sometimes they're the end user, right? But they might not be the decision maker. Your saboteur is one that most people disregard, but you want to be careful to do that, right? The saboteur might be somebody who simply doesn't want anything new because they're very comfortable doing things the way they are. They don't like change. Or the saboteur might be the sister-in-law of the guy who's selling the office furniture to the company. And if you're trying to sell office furniture in there, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So you want to understand why they might have some problems. Okay. So you want to understand how they influence the purchase decision. So we can look at a startup in a number of different ways. We can look business to business or business to consumer, right? Some are both, but again, you want to make sure you can be sustainable. So you want to use some good reasoning as you move into this. So in a business to business environment, we usually have distinct end users, right? They're not always decision makers. They're not even always the payers, right? And then there's other people that are involved. So, the air traffic controller sits at the computers, but somebody else decided what computers they were going to have or what operating system. Somebody else is paying the bill. And there might be others that are trying to undermine what's being accomplished. So you might have saboteurs. We want to try to identify these parties. In a business to consumer, we're going to have different customer segments as well, or customer types. Now, Johnny is interested in a gaming console. He knows what his friends told him. Mom and dad, they might have some role in this situation. They might be paying the bill. They might be deciding what is going to happen. And don't forget little sister. She wants to know that the games or the console that they're getting will play her games too. So she's going to have some influence on it. And obviously, the gaming company, the friends at school, all these others can be influencers as well. So you want to try to identify the customer segments. So when we're defining our customer segments, look at the whole ecosystem. You know, the different customer types we talked about are listed here first. How is it distributed? What do they have to go through? Are there regulations or policies that have to be met? If you're in the medical field, I work with the Health Science Organization quite a bit, and a lot of things that we come up with there have to go for FDA approval. That can be a process that can last several years. It's hard to be sustainable if you're investing money over that period of time and you can't bring anything in, right? If you're a startup. That's why a lot of times the good ideas are bought or licensed to larger organizations. So we want to understand anyone in the system that's participating in the market. So when we talk about customer development, we break it down to two areas, the search and the execution, right? In the search, we're doing customer discovery. And then we're trying to validate. This is that QRST that I was talking about. We come up with our hypothesis and we're going to do the customer discovery. And only after we've refined that search a little bit do we move into the execution. So the idea is to discover who our customers are first, because we have to try to come up with a problem solution fit. If you can't answer the question, what problem are you solving for your customers? It's going to be very hard for you to move your product forward. So you want to make sure you can do that. So problem solution fit. Can we identify and validate a problem or need? And when we say validate, get the people to talk about it. And again, no yes or no answers or questions. We're not going to say, wouldn't this make your life easier? Because you know what the answer is going to be? Yes. Most of the time it's going to be yes, because people don't like to disappoint you. But if you ask them to take out their checkbook right afterwards, you'd be surprised how often they're going to say no. Right? So we want to make sure we identify and validate the problem or need. And whether we have a feasible solution to that. Now keep in mind, we're talking feasible. One of the other things that come into play here, and I think it might be further in, but I'm going to mention it anyhow. We talk about the minimum viable product in startups. Don't try to do everything at the first shot. Find out what's most important. You can add iterations further on. You can make some changes further on and make some adaptations and improve your product. But if you're constantly trying to get to the perfect solution, you can be chasing yourself down a rabbit hole. Not good. We want to get something out there that's feasible. So when we discover our product solution, we start to get to that product market fit.
I just
And
have
the
one
product,
question about that.
yeah,
And it's then when you ask your questions to the people, then
Mhm.
how do you know when to stop asking questions? Because you're probably gonna then continue asking questions. They will say, oh yeah, this would be even better, and this would be even better, and this would be even better. And then again, you then don't know exactly what do they want because they also want everything.
well, okay. And that's gonna be something where, again, you're gonna be asking a number of different things, right? And different parties. You're not just gonna be interviewing one person. And you're going to probably have to rank at some point, what's the most important features? Or ask them to rank what's most important. What do you absolutely need? What would be nice to have, right? But you want to keep the questions open-ended so that they can discuss. Now, typically, we advise teams when they go out and do the interviews to ask for about 10, 15 minutes. It's not unusual for the interviews to last an hour and a half, if you ask in the right questions, because people like to talk about themselves. So if you don't ask yes or no questions, if you ask them to talk about their problems or what they would like to have, you'll be surprised at how much depth you'll get. And there's tricks to the interview, right? Even if you have somebody who's not forthcoming right away, ask them to walk you through their typical day. What do you do all day? How do you start your day? What's the first thing? And get drill down. Don't let them say, oh, well, I prepare the orders for shipping. Oh, what's that involve? What do you have to do that? Do you do it by yourself? Are there other people involved? And start to get some depth about what they do. And you're going to they're going to tell you at some point in time, yeah, this part is a pain in the neck. I hate when I have to do this, but it's part of the process. That's what we call aha moments, when you stumble upon something that you hadn't thought about. Okay, so we want to make sure we're delivering a product or service that satisfies those customer problems or needs. And value to the customer is when we remove some pain or create something new for them, make their job easier, right? So once we validated the customers, we start to ask for some orders. And a lot of times, I also spent a fair amount of time in the computer industry. In the computer industry, we used to talk about beta products, right? These were products that were first generation. In fact, when I worked with AT&T and everything, I allowed my staff, my employees to use beta products. I wouldn't allow anybody at AT&T to use beta products, especially Microsoft, because Microsoft likes to work their bugs out over the first year, right? I wanted my end customers to be really happy. I didn't want to ruin them. So my staff would be the ones who would be validating the product. But you can validate a product by introducing introduction package. We're going to give you 60 days free or 30 days free. And after that, we're going to start charging. How many people stay on? This provides us with some validation that now they're paying for something, right? You don't want to always give it away. So we validate with early sales. And then we look for the business model fit. And business model fit speaks to repeatable and scalable. Can we make money? And this is where we move from startup to being a real company. So after we validate, we start creating customers. right? Now we're moving into the main line and we start to build our company. We start to grow. So the I-Core focus that we do, and this is what I'm going to recommend for you for the first, a 2-week program, is in the customer discovery phase, because that's the foundation for everything. If I don't have customers, I don't have a business. I don't care if you spent $100 million. If nobody buys it, you don't have a business, right? So what you want to do is hopefully, and the I-Core philosophy is spend less money to begin with, but do it wisely. So the idea is to do customer discovery. And when I'm teaching I-Core, we do something important. We celebrate the teams that decide they don't have a business, that decide that it's a no-go because they took the time to find out that, nobody wants it. And they didn't spend a whole lot of money doing it, right? So this is pretty important, that the idea is don't go and spend a ton of money before you find out whether or not it's something somebody wants. So we build a business model and we start with guess, right? We don't know. Get it into your head that you don't know. You think you're guessing that something might be. We also call them hypotheses, right? That we have to turn into facts. And we do that through customer discovery and the scientific method, right? So we hypothesize, we create an experiment, we go through the interview, we analyze the data, and again, data points of one are useless. You need to get multiple data points, and you iterate. You realize that, oh, no, you know what? I was looking in the wrong direction here, but because of my interviews, I have a clue where to go. A friend of mine and his team developed a system where they can assess scar tissue and the strength of the scar tissue. And they thought this would be really great in obstetrics and GYN, because there's a lot of women who get cesareans for their first birth, but would like to give natural birth the second time. And the strength of the scar tissue is critical to whether or not they can do so without any problems. Well, he found out real quickly that this was going to be one of those things that was going to take 3 to 5 years to get going, because obstetrics, GYN are very reluctant to change. Everything has to be proven. There's also FDA requirements and all this other stuff. So during the course of their discovery, they found out that the scar tissues are also very important to athletes, to sports. And in particular, professional sports are really interested, because if they can get a player on the field sooner, it makes a lot more money, right? So they pivoted. They started to realize this was important. And they only did that because they went through enough interviews to find out that why obstetricians and gynecologists said, yeah, this is really important, but they heard the word but often enough, they realized that they weren't going to get anywhere there initially. Now, that doesn't mean they got rid of that thought. What it means is they realized they had address a different need first to become sustainable. And once the company's profitable and everything, they'll go back to that and they'll start to go through the process of getting it approved. But that's why you go after the low hanging fruit. But that iteration, that ability to shift is very important. And if you're working with a team, it requires that everybody shares their information. You know, if Carl does an interview today and he doesn't share that information with Daniel, and Daniel's goes down a different way because he didn't know about that, it doesn't help each other. So what we do is, and in the earlier slide we hinted at that, you save records of your interviews. You identify the most critical elements and you record them, whether you use Google Docs or a spreadsheet or whatever. These were important elements. These were things that people didn't care about, and you start to see patterns. And I think this is what Celeste mentioned earlier. This is where data analysis comes in. You can't just do a lot of interviews and figure, oh, I remember all this. No, take the time to identify it, bring it into play. Okay. And we get back right back here. We're starting here. These are the first hypotheses and iterations or first experiments that we're going to do, the customer segments and the value propositions. And as we start getting into it, we're going to identify some things that work. And it's going to be by asking things, what's your biggest headache? What don't you like about the current system? What prevents you from doing your job well or doing it fast? And we need to focus in that area, right? We need to make sure that we're finding out from the customer, not simply from what we think. And as we do that, we start to realize that, well, gee, this value is not strong enough or not important enough, or this customer segment is so restricted, we can't address that right now. And what I suggest to the teams I work with is to do it this way. Don't just take them off the business model canvas, because what happens if you do that, somebody's bound to go back and do it again. Identify those things that you already decided weren't going to work and leave them on there. Leave a note on there for yourself. One of the things that we do in publications is, well, I should say in engineering and science publications, not so much so in the business world, is we publish things that don't work so that people don't repeat our mistakes. Now, in the business academics, we have not learned that lesson. A lot of times they'll only publish something that supports your original hypothesis, and then people make the same mistakes over and over again. Don't fall down into that trap. If you identify something that's not going to work, leave it up there so that you know not to chase that. Okay? And refresh your screen at some point in time. Once you have your you've gone through everything and you have your business segments, you can consolidate, but keep the other one around. Because as I mentioned to Carl earlier, you're going to do customer discovery forever, right? Forever. You're going to get to a point where you're not going to think you can have too many interviews, because each one reveals something new for you. And what you want to do is repeat as needed. No magic tricks here, right? You want to get the order, you got to ask for it. You got to go out and chase it. So your end goal is going to be to fill in this complete business model canvas or something similar, whatever tool you guys are going to be working with. I highly recommend this one. But ideally, you're going to address these other areas as well as you fill out your whole business model. Things like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to build my relationships? How am I going to deliver my product? What channels do I use? What do the customers want? Right? Your restaurant and hospitality services, you're going to find out that a lot of restaurants only want to buy from distributors who carry a broad line. Then there's other restaurants that only want to buy from fresh produce, right? And everything in between. What you've got to do is start to find out how they fit with the customer segments. And data drives results. Make sure you have repeatable and testable hypothesis. An hypothesis that says, well, they're going to save money. Who's not interested in saving money? It doesn't give us any unique perspective, right? What we want to do is we want to quantify it. It's 20% less expensive than whatever's on the market now. That gives me something to measure, right? So we want to do that. You look for the pattern analysis and recognition. Learn how to analyze data, or get somebody in your team who can analyze data, or bring in other people. And we're looking for information, not affirmation. So we don't want to just say, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? It's too easy to get those answers. So that's the deck I have. And what I really think is important here is that you consider, when you're looking at any startup, how you're going to build out your team. So the other thing I teach in the business school, I teach leadership and ethics and also team development. One of the most important things for a startup is to make sure they have the right team. That doesn't mean you have to have 37 people or anything like that, but you might need 2 or 3 people, right? You might need somebody who's good at analysis. You might need somebody who's good at doing interviews. You might need a technical person. Figure out what you need and make sure that they're committed to the team. So you have to learn how to handle a team as well. But that's going to become very important as you move forward, because, and we do this in I-Corps, by the way, we require a minimum of 3 in the National I-Corps with possibility of a 4th. But we call for the entrepreneurial lead. That's the spokesperson. That's the one who's getting out front all the time. We look for the PI, principal investigator, or the technical lead. This is the person who came up with the idea, who's defined it, if you will, invented it. And then we look for an industry mentor, and mentors are a great resource. Somebody who can introduce you to parties. Because keep in mind, if you're going to do interviews, you got to find out how to find parties you can talk to. Sometimes you'll know, and other times you need somebody to introduce you. And some of the things that you can do to gain more traction, as an example, if you're doing an interview, ask that person, is there anybody else in the company I can talk to? Because keep in mind, there could be multiple customer segments in one company. Is there anybody else I can talk to about this? Do you know of anybody in another company I can talk to? What should I have asked that I didn't ask? Give me some insight. And always ask them if you can come back, if you find out something, can you come back and talk to them again? And you'll be surprised how much that can help you, because your interview 20 is going to be very different from your interview 1. And you might get some insights that you want to go back to some of the other parties and say, hey, I was doing these other interviews and somebody mentioned this, and I thought that might be important to you. What do you think? Get them to talk about it. Okay. Any questions?
If there's no student questions yet, maybe a question from my end is how you were just talking about the interviews, right? And how essential they are. Like as a student team, how would you suggest they go about finding people to interview?
Well, obviously, they're going to focus on a domain of their product, right? So if it's an electronic device, who would possibly use it or whatever. I mean, that's where those guesses come in, right? This is who I think is going to use it. But the other thing is to ask. When you're out there, ask, you do an interview and you find somebody who has some interest, ask them who else they know. Who else can you point me to? Reach out to other people in the industry. Sometimes, one of the things we also celebrate is when people get thrown out of buildings, right? Because that means they tried to do something, they tried to get in. So don't be afraid to reach out. And if you know somebody in the industry or whatever, somebody who you can view as a mentor or whatever, ask them if they can introduce you to anybody. Even if you don't interview them, they might be able to connect you with other parties. So the initial interviews, what we recommend a lot of time is don't go after the easy ones first. I know that so-and-so would be interested in this product. Well, you're not going to get a whole lot of insight from that person because you already know or you think you know what they're thinking. Go after some of the others first, because you might then have a different question to ask them. But getting interviews can be a task. You have to really dive into what you're trying to do. Now, I think Gustavo has a question.
Yes, hi. Thank
Hi.
you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask, considering the fact that we only have 2 weeks to develop this project, how much time would you dedicate to the data collection part, and how much time would you dedicate to the developing of the idea itself, or how would you reconcile those parts to be as most efficient as possible?
Generally speaking, we expect in the regional format, when we do the regional program, that the teams will do between 10 and 15 interviews a week. So in the national program, we tell people up front to figure they're going to be spending 15 to 20 hours a week working on a project. So it is intense. I just did an engineering team not too long ago, a whole class, and they had the 2.5 weeks to do it, and they all had 25 interviews, the teams. Keep in mind, when you do the interviews, if you have a team, everybody on a team doesn't have to be at every interview. Divide and conquer. But you got to make sure that you share that information. You got to capture that information and share it. So create a Google Doc or a spreadsheet and document your interviews every day on the day you do them. so that people have that information before they go out. Does that help any?
Yes, but then like, should we be doing interviews even in the last part of the project? In the last week, let's say?
Well, if you're only doing it for 2 weeks, I'd say yes.
All right, thank you.
We generally have the teams doing interviews right up to the final presentation.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
More questions?
I mean, I do have one, but it's like, okay, I already have an idea. Would you recommend me to start from zero and not and think like I don't have any idea and begin doing that data collection and then see if that data collection matches my idea, or try to figure with the data collection I can fit my idea to it?
Well, you want to take your idea and imagine what you think the product is going to be. Okay. And then again, you don't want to hold it up and say, give all the technical details. If it's in the space of, I don't know, a medical device, what group would be interested in this? And what you want to do is you want to open up, again, questions relevant to that domain. So if you're creating a medical device, you're not going to go ask the restaurant manager what they think about this, right? You want to interview doctors. You want to, so I don't know what type of device you're talking about, but you want to talk to people that might have a need for that particular area. So you want to work that domain, but you don't want to reveal the technology. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Any others?
Or if there aren't any other question, I have one. Oh, thanks for sharing your email address with everybody. I have one technical question for you. Is there a way that we could have the slides? I have a couple of students who asked if they could have the
Oh yeah,
slides.
I can forward this. I have your email address from earlier. I'll
Right.
forward the deck to you.
Excellent. Then I'll pass it on to the rest of the crowd, because I think it's certainly very very eye-opening for me. This is all new for me too, so it's been very
Good.
Anything else from the students?
I have a question actually. If I have a product in mind that is not exactly something that the market is already asking, but it's something that could have potential, how exactly could I get those interviews?
Well, if you think that it has potential, then you have an idea of some customer segment that might be interested. So there's no shortcut to getting interviews. You got to walk up to people and ask them.
Yeah, there's no shortcuts, but like having such little time and knowing that we probably would have to contact people outside of Costa Rica to get this information makes it a little bit complicated.
Right. As much as possible, do things like Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, because to see people's reaction often is very important when you're interviewing them. But you can send out an email and request a few minutes of their time for a quick Zoom session. And play the student card. I'm a student working on a marketing program. I'm working on something, and I really like to get your input. Right.
Okay.
The other thing is you might be able to use LinkedIn to help identify some people that are in that space. So try to look at, and hell, you gotta Google and twist arms and do whatever you have to get there.
Okay. Yeah, LinkedIn is a great choice. I hadn't considered that one. So thank you very much.
Okay.
other questions? If not, then thank you again, Mike. It was very interesting. I think it was really helpful to all of our students. I have one very quick announcement to make, and that is that we finally got approval for our prize money, so that's good. We
Oh,
now
that's
have
good.
a $500 prize, so that I hope motivates everybody a little bit more. And with that, I think we are done here. I will, once the recording process and all kind of stuff, I'll send everybody a link. I'll post it to YouTube. And if there's no other questions, then I think I'll say goodnight.
Thank you
Good
very
luck,
much.
guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, bye.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you
Good
very
night.
much. Have a good night.
Good night.